We are live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have what looks to be about 340 participants this morning for me, this afternoon and evening for my panelists. I want to welcome you. My name is Arthur, and I'm the lead voice of the Music Snobs podcast and heavy Dirty Mind aficionado. I'm rarely asked about it because I can't shut up about it. And we assembled a panel. I have some, I really do have some heavy hitters that are with me today. I would like to start with, to the square on my left, Nicolay, who is the co-founder of the Grammy-nominated The Foreign Exchange. In my upper left, I have Keith Murphy, who's a senior editor-at-large with Vibe magazine, also a very prolific writer for ESPN's The Undefeated website. And Keith's got a great article featured now on The Undefeated's homepage that talks about Prince's evolution, force of habit, as a race man, taking him from Minneapolis to Baltimore. I encourage everyone to read that article. Above me, my dear sister, Karen Gabay, who is host of The People for BBC Radio Manchester in the UK. And she's also currently producing a Bob Marley documentary for BBC television. And last, I did save the best for last, and everybody agrees, so nobody's going to dispute me. But the incomparable Cynthia Horner, who is the CEO of Right On Digital and the former editor-in-chief of Right On magazine. And just to really communicate the importance for her being here and enjoying us and joining us, I'm even kind of nervous talking about her. But Cynthia Horner and Right On magazine, that magazine is to magazines as Don Cornelius and Soul Train is to television. And these were the platforms for any artist who wanted to break into the Black music space. They needed to be on Soul Train. They needed to be in Right On magazine. So it's very, very significant that she's joining us today. It is without question that she has interviewed Prince before he became, Prince in all capital letters. And she's, forged relationships with not just Prince, but with many artists, and can really add a perspective, a ground zero, if you pardon the expression, a ground zero perspective on the development of this artist. Dirty Mind is, it's an important album, yeah. But what it really is, Dirty Mind and those 8 songs are the cornerstone, okay, to a foundation that sustained the entirety of Prince's career moving forward. It all stands on Dirty Mind. It's the foundation of the mythic Prince. It's the foundation of the cohesion of his look. It is also the introduction of Prince as a band, the concept as a band. Hugely important and influential album. And I need us to use just a little bit of imagination, and I'll stop talking and we'll get right to it. But I need you to imagine a world before Purple Rain. I need you to imagine a world before Little Red Corvette, and look at the world that was radio driven, predating any kind of social media, where everything that we knew about the artist was communicated to us through their music and their albums, and also, interviews and articles in Right On magazine, appearances on Soul Train, and sometimes for certain artists, American Bandstand, as well. So imagine this, and what you know about Prince before 1980 is I Want to Be Your Lover and the Prince album. and we have him here. Pardon the glare, I'm gonna try to, okay. We know this album, we've seen it all before. So we've gone from this to this, right? In 1 year later. 1 year later. And what you can't see on my replica here is that on the album, when it was originally released, there was a sticker about here, circular, and it was hot pink, and it had white spray painted sort of lettering, as a parental advisory warning. And the only other types of records that had parental advisory warnings in 1980 were records by like Richard Pryor, for example, warning the buyer that there was explicit content, explicit language in this music. So now, mind you, Prince, in theory, is just a one-hit wonder with this album. Huge single for him, right? But instead of building on that momentum, okay, my man does this. Puts out an album that is funky, has a punk rock feel to it, right? And is drastically different from an image standpoint. So much so, and I put the slide, because of course technology is going to be my enemy today, so I can't share my slides. So I'm putting it in the chat again, but there were two Right On magazine covers that I want to start this conversation with. In fact, I'm gonna kind of go old school. I'm gonna do this just to make sure that everybody can see this. Okay. Again, public link is in the chat. This is Right On magazine's cover from December of 1979. Okay, at the height of I Want to Be Your Lover. Okay, this is roughly 14 or so months later, April of 1981, after Dirty Mind was released in the previous October, I believe, or November. This headline here says, and I quote, "Yes, this is Prince. It's really different now." Now, and I wanted to open up with Ms. Horner, because it was something that I've always thought, I always theorized, and now I have the opportunity to actually ask you about it. Was it the idea, from what you can recall, was it the idea for Right On magazine, who helped bring Prince to popularity and help build his audience as a sex symbol, to basically tell the audience, don't freak out, don't leave, just stay with us, because we're still with Prince and we're going to guide you through this transition?
Well, I would say that you pretty much summed it up, but we didn't really think of it that way. He kind of guided us in the direction he wanted to go. So as the imagery started appearing, we just kind of let him be the director of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
But it was important for us to allow the readers to understand that it was still Prince. Mm-hmm. It was still the Prince that everybody had grown to love through our stories and through the different songs that he was creating. And we didn't want him to lose that audience, because that audience was very important to Right On. My job as the editor of the magazine was to make sure that we always had popular people to promote in the publication. And I wasn't going to let him go.
Okay.
I couldn't do that. Okay. I was too responsible for his creation for him to just deviate and then just disappear, and then I'd have to start all over looking for more teen idols.
Right, okay. But I mean, did you have a visceral reaction? I mean, did you have a, the hell? Did you have a kind of reaction of wondering because when Dirty Mind was released, this was his third album, on Warner Brothers, and their Black music division, he was helping to build that with these albums, but he was releasing this album in the midst of Stevie Wonder's Hotter Than July, which was a big record for Stevie Wonder. Also Michael Jackson, who was coming off the wall, did an album with his brothers called Triumph. Diana Ross was leveraging a comeback with the Diana album that had songs like Upside Down on it, produced by Nile Rodgers, who was hot as a producer with his work with Chic. So in other words, did it feel like, from your perspective, knowing the totality of these artists, did it feel like this was a mistake? This album was a risk. He could be dismantling, sabotage almost?
Well, after trying to say, you can I just say that, did the red shorts put you off, putting him on the front cover?
I think a lot of people felt that he had made a mistake, especially when it got to the point where they were going to have a parental advisory sticker on the album.
Yeah.
And a lot of his fans at that point were young people, teenagers, some even preteens that just loved seeing pinups and everything of him. But you have to remember, Prince was a true artist. He was not a video creation or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, those that were in his inner circle and had a lot of direct access to him realized that if the artist was feeling something else creatively, that you go with what that is. You don't hold the artist back, because we've all heard many stories over the years about different artists that complain that thanks to record company politics or management difficulties, that they were not able to express themselves creatively. And I always respected creative people. That's why I was a great person to be an editor of a magazine like that, because I was always looking for artists that were on the cutting edge. They didn't necessarily have to be an artist that was the cutest artist in the room or had the best dance moves. I always appreciated artists who had music that had something to say. When I was really young, for instance, I used to go to the record stores and I would look on the back of the albums to find out who actually created those projects. Because most of the time it was not really the artist, it was the producers, the producing team, the songwriting teams. So I always enjoyed the messages that were in the music. And Prince was somebody that was creating his own material. So I figured if this is how he was feeling at that time, we should just ride the train with him. Don't jump off. A lot of people back then did feel that you should jump off because they were frightened by parental advisory stickers. They were terrified over the fact that that music might be considered salacious or maybe not something that would be a good role model for young people. But like I said, I saw what a visionary he was. So I decided I would just ride the train regardless of whatever flack I might have gotten from the people I worked with, because they were horrified, especially since my name was mentioned in the liner notes. And I still hear from people all these years later that said, my God, your name you, the clean-cut Cynthia Horner, your name is on Prince's album, and that's the kind of material he was coming out with. I even had to explain to my parents about that.
Wow.
Because people got to my parents and said, do you know that your daughter's name is on Prince's album, and this is not necessarily something young people should be listening to?
I mean, I was saying that that album is fixed in some parents' minds. It's interesting that you're saying that all these years later people question it, because sometimes people only see Prince in the context of that album cover and those lyrics, and they can't move past that. It was so revolutionary.
Yeah, I think that it's also the context of when he was doing this album, how the music industry was. It was completely segregated. From like, say, 80 to 82, things were crazy for Black artists, to the point where I believe there was like 16 or 17 Black artists that was in the top 40 in like 1979. And by the end of 81, I believe it was like 7 or 8. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Prince kind of understood that, and he wanted no part to be segregated. Now, I've had my my arguments and my disagreements about him coming to the Warner Brothers people and saying, hey, don't make me black. I kind of like sour with that a little bit. But looking back at it, I can understand his mindset of not wanting to be pigeonholed in that environment. Not in a Black environment, but just in that environment, how crazy it was for Black artists. So I think that was him just shooting a shot, just saying, you know what, if you want to pigeonhole me, I'm going to make music that the Cars would make. Right. And I'm gonna make you play yourself and say that this is R&B, straight up R&B music. Because it's not straight up R&B music. I'm doing new wave synth rock. This is some shit that somebody else would do. And you're gonna try to pigeonhole me and say he's Black. So I just enjoyed seeing, reading about how rock radio stations were saying, oh, this is just too Black. And you're listening to Dirty Mind, you're like, oh, you guys are just lying. It's not true. Mm-hmm.
Keith, let me ask you a question about that too, because I've had my own issues with that. And I alluded to the presentation of the band, to have him front and center with Dez and Andre, and that when you see them in a club, when you see a Dirty Mind show, you will see a front line.
Right.
Black men and guitars, and then whites in the back. But it's presented as a collective unit. Is there any kind of counter that you feel, not necessarily to the argument or to your feeling about it, but is there any kind of, because I kind of had to do some negotiation with that. And to be not to be funny, but when I saw this, and I saw very little of it, because again, it's like I had to kind of sneak to listen to Dirty Mind, but seeing the pictures and everything, I listened to a lot of rock music at that time. It was my older sister that gave me the foundation of Black music: Ohio Players, Parliament, Commodores, Earth, Wind, Fire. And then on my own as a boy, I got into other stuff. But I was a music head, and I equated seeing Prince and Dez and Andre in the same way that I could equate Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Bill Wyman in the front. Because when you put a guitar on a Black man and he plays lead, and he like really plays lead, it from my vantage point, I immediately equated it to like a rock group.
Right.
Did you have any kind of feeling like that, or any kind of for lack of a better word, almost like consolation, like maybe it ain't all the way that?
Right. I think I looked at it as Prince was a Black dude from Minneapolis, and even I knew what Minneapolis was back then. And I think what he was trying to do was, it wasn't so much of a consolation, oh yeah, whatever. It was more or less like, well, of course this would be the band's makeup if you're talking to a Black dude from Minneapolis. Because kind of played both sides. He kind of hung out with both people. He was hanging out with white folks, black folks, gay folks, and it was like, it was a no-brainer to me.
Can I just interject there as well to say that I spoke to Alexander O'Neill today, and he was saying why he loved Dirty Mind was because Prince actually put in action what Keith was talking about. He had the black and white musicians in that band, and that was so far out from what anyone else was doing. And, you know, if you put yourself back into that time, as much as we wanted to be proud of our black identity, we were also tired of being told we were only black, and black, you, as a black person, you know, you were strange if you liked rock music, you know, this is kind of your lane and this is where you've got to stay. And that was the same in the UK and whatever. And so what other way to even really burst out of that is to go all the way to the extreme to say, you will listen to me, you will hear me. And that's what the lyrics and that album says.
Well, can I jump in? When I first met Prince, he had moved to California at the time. He was back and forth between California and Minneapolis because he was recording. But at one point, he said, "You need to come to Minneapolis. You need to see what it's like there." And he felt that by me doing so, I would begin to understand him a little bit more. And it was a good decision that he made. In fact, he had me continue to go to Minneapolis quite a bit. There was more than I wanted to go, actually. And I went to the clubs, and I would see that the clubs were predominantly white audiences because that's who was living there. But he could just jump on stage and start performing, and color meant nothing. And that was his real mission, to make sure that at some point in his career that the fans would feel the same way he did, because we knew about separations. Just like in the case of Right On, we had Right On for the black artists and another magazine at our company called Tiger Beat. And that was a magazine for the Osmonds and Bobby Sherman, the Partridge Family, and
Tiger Beat, boy, Tiger Beat, y'all weren't scared of pink hearts all on the cover. every issue.
Yeah. So, and when Prince got to know me, he realized that my background, although I was definitely a black woman, I'm from a biracial family. And I grew up in a white neighborhood, and I was the one of maybe 3 or 4 black students at the college that I attended. And Prince kind of embraced that because I guess he felt like we had that connection. And he felt that kind of, this kind of more open attitude was where music needed to be. Because he didn't necessarily feel that he should be in the black music department at Warner Brothers, but he had to start somewhere. Okay. But just like Michael Jackson, for example, Michael Jackson, Prince, and a few other artists felt that the music should not matter to anybody in terms of the color, the skin color of the artist. It should be only about the music. And both of these artists were very committed to making sure that message eventually got out. And I think that that's very important. I think that a lot of our younger music fans are not really aware of that because times have changed a lot. We're in a more multicultural situation these days. But back then, that was not how it was. Yeah. I mean, you really had to fight. You had to fight for what you wanted if you wanted to do something different. And Keith, I'm sure you can elaborate on that too, because you know what I'm talking about.
Right. Nicolay, I want to bring you in on this and shift the conversation slightly, because we're actually in part talking about artist development,
right? Which
is something that isn't in vogue anymore. And you know, I don't know if you find any parallels, you know, in your experience in developing the catalog of Foreign Exchange, but an album like Dirty Mind to come out, you know, as the third album, as a follow-up to a successful album, especially a very successful single, what kind of environment would do you think that you would like find yourself in, you know, you being in a similar kind of situation?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, for one, I heard Dirty Mind after the fact, years after the fact, you know, so I come at it from a standpoint of my first exposure was Purple Rain, and after that I went back. And so I think I already at that point was looking at it with a certain sort of hindsight mind state. I think when I look at it now and the development of the first three records, I don't feel that it's such a big shift from Prince to Dirty Mind. I think it was a process of Prince sort of shedding certain layers over time to become more and more himself. You know, I think the first album is kind of could be an Earth, Wind and Fire album, could be, I mean, to a certain extent, but you know what I'm saying? It could be it's a much more traditional album. The second album, he's removing some of those layers. He's doing less overdubs. He's you know, even something like I Want to Be Your Lover, which has like 6 doubled guitar parts, in itself is a relatively simple recording. And so you see already some of those layers are removed. And I think especially the year 79 was kind of like really the year that I think everything changed for him. If you think about the fact that in January of that year, he did his very first live shows at the Capri Theater, that I guess, according to myth and or historical fact, kind of bombed. And then like if you fast forward to the end of the year, he's doing his first tour. He's playing the Roxy and stuff like that. He's introducing the Bikini Briefs. He is taping American Bandstand and some of that stuff. And so I think it was much more gradual than I think it seemed at the time, particularly now with the advantage of looking back. I think he was really shedding layers in a way that I know that as an artist myself, I'm very, very familiar with. That first album normally is the album that you kind of have to make. You have to sort of, you have to really, you know, I guess notch out the space that you can occupy in the current landscape. And from there on out, ideally, if you're successful enough, you get to do it again. And I think with each time you ideally become closer to who you are. And I think Dirty Mind is kind of being seen as sort of the second start, you know, and kind of like a reset of chords. But I think that's largely because of how historians or biographers have framed it. I think it is a very from a development standpoint, it is a significant sort of new beginning, because I think for the first time he comes with like real concepts that like I think played a part for years to come, like Uptown, you know, not even the song, but what that meant to him is something that he built on for years to come. Also an album where I think he really stretched out in terms of songwriting much more than the albums before. Like When You Were Mine, I think is a good example of just a song that you wouldn't really hear on the first 2 records. And I think he had the benefit of having people in his corner, whether it was the record label, and you can question their motives, you know, and I certainly would. But even the fact that now he's got the management team of Cavallo and Fargnoli behind him, and they were the ones, you know, again, depending on what you believe, they were the ones that helped him sort of with the clout of telling Warner, like, yeah, we know that these are demo recordings to whatever degree, but this is the album. And this is why it's important that it comes out this way. So I think in that year of 1979, I think it really just everything changed. And I got to think it was partly something that he probably envisioned well before then, and I think it was partly something that just the environment sort of helped push him along, and that development from there on out didn't stop. Obviously we're not talking about controversy today, or even 1999, but from here on out, every album kind of is a step in the direction of the sort of Purple Rain superstardom, and especially if you think that with every new album came a new outfit, came a new look, came a new aesthetic, and looking back, it's easy to think like that. It seems like there's years between those albums, but it really was something that it was much more, a situation of just a constant sort of evolution to my mind.
Do you not think he's being his authentic self? Because we know that he liked the Clash. He was watching Bob Marley, and all these artists are coming through. It's early hip hop, and all these people are now being their authentic selves. They're singing about their life, what they know. They can shock, and again, in the black world, apart from a Sylvester pushing the boundaries with a look, people weren't doing that. So, of course, Vic James as well. So, do you think that that's what he was doing? He was actually saying, because in his interviews with the NME as well, he says, "I want to be me. Oh, I want to be myself." That's what he says to Chris Salovich in '81, and I think that the timing of it is quite important, because if you sit and see artists like the Clash and the Specials and all those bands are coming out, you want to follow. He must have wanted to follow that path too, and not kind of be harken back to like an Earth, Wind and Fire or even a P-Funk, if those fans of those.
Yeah.
I hate to just use the term rock, but the rock world, the rock journalists began to pay attention to Dirty Mind too, and began to talk about that album in the same way, from an innovative, this is what's next, right, in the same way that they would talk about Talking Heads' Remain in Light album. And I mean, certainly the Police by that time had really gotten off the runway, but the Zenyatta Mondatta album also, we talked about these innovative next types of things. And do you think that, holding up this again, but the configuration, this introduction of the band photo, looking this way against the brick wall, sort of not really being anywhere, but being everywhere at the same time, gave almost either a signal or some sort of cue that, hey, we are a part of the CBGB aesthetic that's growing in New York, as Blondie is coming up, and these groups like that.
It's brilliant that you said that, because I had that in my mind.
I know you did.
Kids doing it, right? But the crazy part is, while the rock journalists swarm, like New York Times, rock journalists swarm to him. All of the rock mags, Cream, swarm to him. Couldn't be played on rock radio stations.
No, couldn't play on any in the UK.
So
right.
To me,
it
says that the rock journalists were ahead of the curve, because they always sided with the cool kids. Prince was the cool kid. The rock radio was still Musclehead, Middle America, Bob Seger type of stuff, right? So they were looking at me like, oh man, this is just too freaky. This will piss off the audience that would go on to boo Prince at the Rolling Stones show, right? So I find
that's a good point. Like, how come that didn't translate? Like, how come that didn't filter through? Because it was Mick Jagger that got him on that wanted him for that show and put him on the largest stage of the tour.
It's the strangest thing in the world to me that the Stones fans were not smart enough to get what Prince was throwing back to them. But I think, there was some anti-gay things going on. There was anti-disco.
Disco was,
Yeah.
They looked at any black artist, oh, you were part of those disco people. Boo, boo you.
And this
the whole thing was just weird to me.
Yeah, just let me to keep the audience kind of together with what we're talking about. And I know you're familiar with, Prince being an opening act on the Rolling Stones LA shows in I think it was like LA Coliseum, 100,000 people, and being pelted and booed. Controversy had not been released yet as an album. So as far as anyone knew, to go and buy the current Prince album, they would still have been able to buy Dirty Mind, even though the look and the aesthetic and Mark Brown replacing Andre Simone on bass, that was the program, but that's not what the public necessarily had, particularly rock music, even though Controversy was released to Black radio. Okay, I'm sorry, Keith. I just want to.
No, and that's the important part. Like, Cynthia can speak to this more because she was in a place covering this where, you know, he still had his black bass with Dirty Mind, but at the same time, a lot of Black folks were saying, "Where's this guy going?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where is he headed?" Like she can speak more to that because she was in ground zero with that.
Well, one thing that I'll say, when he was booed at the Rolling Stones concert, you have to remember the mindset back then. Most people who were music fans, they figured if you were a Black artist, you should be on stage singing and dancing like, you know, the typical, like maybe like the 5 Heartbeats, the Temptations or whatever. Right. So for Prince to get out there, even though he had the look, he had his outrageous clothing, they knew that he was supposed to be a Black artist. And back then, that was still somewhat taboo. The audience wanted to see somebody else out there. They didn't want to see this Black guy out there doing music that they considered their own music. He was kind of treading on their territory.
Yes.
And a lot of people are frightened by change.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that he did a bad show. They just weren't used to what he had to offer. And we still have that problem. We still have that problem in society. It's starting to change. It has changed, and it's starting to change now with all these protest marches. But we still have Black artists that could go somewhere and try to do a show with a predominantly Caucasian audience and not get the acceptance, not because the music was bad, but because it was either different or their mindset was not expansive enough to accept what this person was doing.
Yes.
So, and back then it was definitely that way because things were very segregated. You were either a Black artist, you're a white artist. The Black artists go in the Black publications, Black radio. White artists, even if they're not that great, they're going to mainstream pop and rock.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it was back then. But he knew that he could break through it. He knew he could break through it. So he wasn't really discouraged. There was no reason to be discouraged because he knew that he had a bigger plan.
Yeah.
What anybody would ever know.
I think he doubled down on that. I think that show was like a turning point in his career. I think it's really ironic if you think like fast forward 3 years, and most of those people were probably at a Purple Rain show. You know, the people that pelted him.
Right.
That's how short it. You know, most of those people probably didn't come back at the same time because they were probably in it for the wrong reasons in 84, 85. But I think that show was a turning point. I think it could have, if you read sort of the reactions, the eyewitness accounts, and if you listen to some of the recordings that have circulated, it was a turning point. I think I think he doubled down after that. I think he went all in on the same path. You know, I think if you look at the Controversy record, the tour that he started maybe 2 months after that, I think it could have easily, I think a lesser man could have easily been, I think that could have been it. But I think after he maybe processed some of it, I think he came back much more motivated, much more driven, and proceeded to just do it his way. You know, and I think.
I always
There's something else that Keith touched on, which I think he should expand on. When he mentioned the fact about people being gay, back then, that was a very taboo subject.
Yep.
And because Prince had such an androgynous look, that contributed to some of the preconceived notions that some of these fans or music listeners had about him. They were under the impression this man might be gay, and that wasn't cool back then. See, now it doesn't really matter that much, but back then it mattered a lot.
Yeah, I mean that was a big social taboo, and also I've always wanted just to know especially from Karen, just how was Prince viewed in the UK? Just early on before the Purple Rain madness, and like what were music fans' heads looking at this cat thinking in the UK, just as a dude that was just pulling a Jimi Hendrix, you know? Like what was the mindset back then looking at Prince?
So for me, what I think is that you heard from people who'd seen Prince in the States that it was something mind-blowing, and there was a handful of people who'd heard that. But generally for years, because of that look and also what came after, that was, this is not what Black people do. You know, this is, it's, we listen to reggae music, we listen to lovers rock, we listen to Bob Marley, we like Buffers Johnson, we like Kool and the Gang, even like Specials, but that, no. That is not something. And what's been interesting even in the last couple of years is that a lot of people said their parents put a slammer on it as well. Anybody who tried to break through, that was like, my mother did the same, but my mum liked every kind of music. Had a young mum, she liked everything, but not that. That was like, that's not happening. And so he was, a lot of people now, oh yeah, we love Prince, we always love Prince. No, they didn't. That is not the case, and I know a lot of Black fans as well say that, same, and white fans too, but a lot of Black fans, they went on their own to those concerts if they wanted to go. And I spoke to Chris Salovich today, who wrote the piece on Prince in 1981 for NME, which was, a white rock paper. It covered Black acts, but it's a white rock paper. And Chris had interviewed Bob Marley and people like that a lot. And he went to New York, and he said Prince was totally unique, totally out there. He was like a Picasso, and if you think of, he said that's what he was. And, how many people could grasp that he was unique? They couldn't embrace him for being unique, I don't think. And we had a show in the UK there was a DJ called John Peel who played every kind of music. But again, you'd go to somewhere like that to hear, that would be the only outlet for Prince. But because the lyrics, even for Dirty Mind, that there is no way that could get on radio anyway. Or if we talked about that, there'd be an issue over it. So I felt for many, he was taboo. Prince was taboo. And even when people liked the music, they didn't like the androgynous look. And, in the Black community still today, being gay is a taboo. So if you said you liked somebody who had that pansexual look, people were like, crazy?
Yeah, I mean, he embraced that. I see a lot of this chatter in the comments. That freak model.
Yes.
Which was actually kind of a thing. I mean, Rick James, Super Freak is one of his biggest songs. But that idea that I'm just so far over here with it that you have to really adjust your comfort zone to even deal with it.
But Rick made you smile, didn't he, when he did it? So Rick made you couldn't help but smile or kind of go, But Prince went over that. Prince pushed those boundaries. Prince was like, take me for what I am. I don't care. I don't have to make you. You don't have to laugh with me. You don't have to do any of that with me. And that it was threatening, I think.
And Arthur, you mentioned Rick James. The funny thing about that is that I believe, when did the Street Songs album come out? 81, right?
Great, yes.
So Prince. So Rick had one of the biggest selling albums of any genre that year.
Mystery
You
song.
got to remember, 81 was when music was still on a decline sales wise. So Rick James was selling like 3-4 million copies of an album in 1981. Prince comes out, for all intents and purposes, Dirty Mind bombed commercially.
Right.
Huge success artistically with the critics. So I can understand why Rick James is looking at this kid like who is this kid? Like he just opened up for me. Like, am I supposed to bow down to this kid? Like, get out of here. So it's interesting that both of those artists were making rockish type of music. Was Super Freak was like kind of like a new wave thing. And they weren't getting played on MTV.
Yeah.
Both of them. And that always blew my mind. Like, I mean, that's why David Bowie had to come at Mark Goodman.
Yeah.
Like, why you not playing Prince? Why you not playing these artists? But especially Prince and Rick James. They were made for MTV early on.
Right.
Can I jump in and say something while you're on the topic of Rick James, Keith? I was very close to Rick James. Our publication did a lot for him in terms of giving him visibility and all that. Rick James did a show in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles area, and Prince opened for him because they figured that would be good because both were musicians, both pushed the envelope, so to speak, et cetera, et cetera. Now, although Prince did not do well when he opened for the Rolling Stones, when he opened for Rick James,
Nicolay's nodding.
He crushed it.
Rick James was absolutely furious. The record company, Rick James was signed to Motown, and Motown was the company, of course, that had people like the Supremes, Temptations, all that. So Rick James was their foray into the punk genre, and they just figured it would be a good match. Have Prince come out first and do what he had to do, but Prince really, he showed up and showed out, so to speak.
Wow.
That was the most amazing show that I recall ever seeing Prince do.
Wow.
And the audience went crazy over him. In fact, when Rick James finally had to come out, although Rick James did do a great show because he was a great showman and great musician, Prince eclipsed him.
Wow.
And that was a telling point for people in Prince's camp to know that, okay, maybe certain audiences were not really going to accept his music because of the fact of that color barrier.
Right.
But he could hold his own against anybody, really. And it was just the most phenomenal thing. And Rick James never got over it. He never did.
Yeah.
He did not. He really wanted nothing to do with Prince. He was that angry about the situation. And it was just so amazing because back then, a lot of musicians, they might have been envious of Prince because of his skills and everything.
Right.
But they also kind of disparaged him because of the fact that they assumed he was probably gay based on his wardrobe, the flowing hair and all of that. And I remember when that show was over, all people could do was say, "She kicked his butt."
Yeah, you hear that a lot about those guys.
Yeah.
At that point, people figured, okay, maybe he is gay, but he was fantastic. And so they said that she kicked his butt. That was their expression for what happened at that show.
Wow.
So I figured that would be a funny story to tell you.
Oh, it's a great story.
I think Rick was real. I think Rick was really legit threatened. Felt legit threatened. There's a lot of stories about that tour, and about how, you know, how when you're the opener, you have to set up in front of the main act's equipment.
Right.
And there are stories that they gave Prince less and less and less space as the tour progressed, until they were literally almost on top of the monitors, like kind of like, and he would still crush it. And it there's a lot of, like, I think there was sincere sort of animosity. The story goes that Rick stole Prince's equipment, or borrowed it, and recorded street songs with that as some sort of, like, I guess, like, effort to grab some of that mojo. But I think from all accounts, like, we can tell that Rick was legit, like, realizing that, like, his time may be up because of this kid. And I think, again, it's hard to look back now and sort of appreciate what that must have been, but an opener is not supposed to do that, you know, and yet again, at the same time, every opener sort of dreams they want to at least give the main guy a hard time, you know, and I think that tour, and there's some recordings, you know, that have circulated over the years, and not necessarily from Rick James sets, but from the Prince sets, and you have to look at it in context of what they were playing at the time. They were still playing a lot of the Prince album material, but you could, and even some of the For You material they played, like as long as we're together, stuff like that still, you know, but the show at that time was already kind of like a Dirty Mind show to an extent. Like, he would kiss Gil Chapman, like, on the mouth, and he would, you know, he already would be having some of these zebra stripe sort of outfits on and stuff. And I think, again, this was a gradual sort of move, because that was early 80, you know, and he was already on his way to that sort of Dirty Mind cover, I think, at that point.
I just want to let everybody know we will do a Q&A session in just a few minutes, so get your questions ready, and Krista and I will do our very best to manage the flood so I can ask on air. I didn't want to get
in for 1 second. Just
absolutely. You just start talking over me. I'm not.
My mind just thinks so fast. I just wanted to bring to your attention, when Prince was opening for Rick James, if you think about, try to picture what it was like back then. Things were so different than how they are now. Back then, there could only be one person at a time.
Right, there could only be one.
One anything at a time. One big Black artist at a time. And that, it wasn't just so much that Rick James felt that threatened about Prince taking his place, but the fact that it was reality that the public and the powers behind the scenes always had it set up so it's somebody else's turn. So nowadays, we have a lot of artists that do the same kind of music. We're not saying, okay, we have one Lizzo, so there won't be anyone else. We've got a Lizzo, we've got a Billie Eilish, we've got a lot of different types of artists that are all able to share a stage. But back then, we didn't have all those opportunities. So it was really one person at a time, and that was what Rick James really understood.
Now, you know, it wasn't just Rick, right? I mean, Keith had brought this up to me, you know, offline. Nicolay might even be able to speak to this too. Cameo had been likely watching Prince too, where the apex became, you know, what the Cameo trio look was like in '86 with Word Up and Candy and back and forth. But even, you know, years earlier with Alligator Woman and She's Strange.
Same thing for the Bar-Kays. To an extent.
Yeah, they stripped down too. All the bands were stripping down because of Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody, as soon as you could not find a horn player on a stage by like 81, 82, because everybody was doing synths. Like if you, I think the only people that still had horn players, horn section, was Kool and the Gang. Yeah. And that was it.
Yeah.
Like everybody was like, even like, just think about it. Even George Clinton with Atomic Dog.
Okay.
You don't hear any horns on there, man. What you hear is synths. A lot of synthesizers. So I think Prince and the time, what he did with the time, because everybody did with the time music, everybody followed that sound. And to the point where everybody started sounding like Time records. Everybody started to do that type of funk. I think the only person that was just doing their own thing was Cameo and Zap.
Grace Jones.
Grace Jones ahead of everybody. She was ahead of everybody. She was like,
I'm glad you brought her into it.
Yeah, like she was like, she did whatever. She was doing like Lou Reed covers. She did whatever she wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a strange time in R&B. R&B music was cool. It was really, really cool. Like it was cutting edge. It was like, it was like.
I mean, even Talking Heads got Bernie Worrell to be on the Speaking in Tongues album and toured.
Exactly.
So I want to start to close this out by asking about the increase in press, white press, that Prince got. Cover of Enemy, cover of Rolling Stone, which is probably like the pinnacle at that time. Even on rock magazines, as we get into the Purple Rain years, he was on the cover of Cream magazine, for example. He was on the cover of a English metal magazine called Kerrang! After the release of Purple Rain. Cynthia, did you find that the access to Prince changed? The increase in his popularity began to increase a number of layers in order to be able to.
The access changed, but not necessarily for the reason that you're talking about.
Okay.
It changed for other reasons because, first of all, he was evolving mentally.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of demands on his time. A lot of people wanted to start working with him. He was getting opportunities that he never dreamed possible. So that did make it a little more difficult because the powers that be at record companies, what they do is once an artist looks like the artist has become crossover, they take a different division at the record company, which would be the pop division, and they would want to take over, and the R&B division had to bow down to the pop division, even though the R&B division was what helped the artist get from point A to point B. So there was that mindset that he wouldn't need a ride-on anymore because he was getting closer to getting the Rolling Stones.
Right, need. Use that word need.
Yeah. But Prince, he never really forgot me or anything like that because he was the one that spearheaded his own publicity campaign in the first place. So therefore, he wasn't necessarily going to listen to somebody who might say, well, okay, you've already done right on a few times, let's move on. Because they weren't in a position to talk to him like that. You could not talk to Prince the way you could some of these other artists. Some of these other artists, if you tell them, okay, you've done right on, you've done some of these other Black publications, you did something for Jet before, you did such and such. Now it's time to build you into the artist you always wanted to be. So therefore, we're going to get you some interviews with some of these more with the foreign press and more mainstream press, top tier publications. Couldn't tell him that. He would want it, but he would not necessarily let somebody disparage what he'd already received because that's what he wanted at that time. And he appreciated the fact that if it had not been for a magazine like a Right On, he would never have gotten as far as he needed to in a timely fashion. So that was the one good thing about him. And also, after a while, with the evolution of Prince, we started getting so many other artists that we could actually use that kind of fit our mold a little bit more. We had the new additions, 4 or 5 guys in a group. They could all be pinups, they could be covers, et cetera, et cetera. They did that cute music that the younger teen fans liked hearing. So we had plenty of other artists to work with for the publication. So with Prince being more in the mainstream eye, it did not really affect us because we still had him, but we had all these other people too. Prince launched through his efforts and through the visibility he received. There are so many record companies that started giving other young artists a chance. Because at the time that Prince, that I met Prince, he was only like 18, 19 years old. Back then, record companies weren't really signing artists in that age group. The Jackson 5 was an exception. They had the Jackson 5 and the Silvers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Silvers.
Yeah.
But once Prince started getting big, the record companies were so open to signing other artists that had a lot of clean-cut music, that wouldn't have any kind of parental advisory sticker, all that we had plenty of artists to work with. So it wasn't really a problem. However, the problem does exist in terms of a lot of press feeling that artists have kind of turned their back on the media that had been somewhat helpful in launching their careers or helping them sustain. So I will say that there are other people that definitely felt like it was a problem with him launching into morphing into a bigger star. I know BET definitely had some issues with that.
Let me jump to a couple questions because there's some good ones that I see. This is from the Violet Reality. For Ms. Horner, when was the first time that you noticed that the media would start to pit Prince against Michael?
I can't recall what year that would have been, but I remember the situation because of the fact that I was so close to Michael Jackson. It didn't happen immediately. I do recall after we gave Prince maybe a couple of covers, Michael Jackson was still, of course, in the music business. He was in between albums. I remember him starting to ask a lot of questions about Prince because I used to have complete access to Michael Jackson anytime I wanted. So I was over to his home all the time. And I remember one time I brought a new copy of Right On over there to the Jacksons' home. And Janet and LaToya said, "Oh, who's this? He's cute." Wow, cute. And Michael was like, "Who is this?" He was outraged. He was like, "I was in this magazine." I said, "Well, we discover new talent." And Michael wanted to hear the whole story. He wanted to know everything about how my relationship with Prince evolved. Who set it up? Was it set up through a publicist? Was it set up through management? He wanted to know everything. And then after a while, it just became kind of like an open discussion with everybody. where people would say, who's better, Michael or Prince? Because remember, we were still at that stage where there should only be
There can be only one.
Right. One. So that's why I'm saying I don't remember exactly when it all happened, because it just all evolved after he started appearing in Right On all the time.
Okay.
I mean, because people from radio stations would talk about it, the DJs would talk about it, everybody would talk about it. It was like Prince was the new kid on the block, but he was the total package. He was handsome. He was a fantastic musician. He was a great writer. He was a great producer. He was a great showman. He had most of Michael Jackson's, they had a lot of the similar qualities. It's just that Michael Jackson was more of a vocalist, whereas Prince was more of a musician. But other than that, their careers kind of were going in the same direction, because Michael, too, wanted to be seen more on a pop stage. He didn't want to be confined to just being a Black R&B singer.
And Cynthia, and also they wanted to appeal to an international audience, didn't they? They both wanted to be global.
Right. They wanted to be able to go to England and sell out the biggest stadium. They wanted to be able to go to France, Africa. They wanted to go to all those places, because at that time, although some Black artists could tour, like the Supremes, they were able to go to Africa and some of those places. All Black artists were not able to go on international tours like that. And that's where you could really make your money, because over in the United States, we still had the situation where if you didn't have a current record, the fans were not necessarily going to show up and buy a lot of concert tickets. A lot of artists would bomb, even though they were great, because people would say, well, they don't have anything new. When's the new album coming out? Maybe then we'll buy some tickets. So all artists wanted to have that global platform. That's what's great about the artists today. They do have that global platform, and they don't have to have sold a whole lot of records. But back then it wasn't that way. So it was very, very important to be able to be seen that way.
Let me get to another question. This is from Andrew Corky. And forgive me, Andrew, my name gets butchered a lot. So I apologize when I pronounced it. This is for Karen. Can Karen recall the first time that she listened to Dirty Mind? And what were your initial impressions? He's also a Northerner in the UK.
Okay. I mean, I didn't listen to Dirty Mind at the time, but I think I listened to it as a student, and it was just, it was mind-blowing hearing the album. And also it was, I have to be honest, it's like, in the households that I lived, it was a Caribbean household. So there was a lot of jazz and a lot of reggae. And a lot of my dad was very into informing me that, Jimi Hendrix and Little Richard were key to kind of like Black music. But again, this was so out there. It was like, who could you talk to about listening to this album? And I went to the school that I went to, there was like 3 Black kids out of 600. So, but also they weren't into rock. They were very much into what was pop. So a bit like D'Angelo, our kind of like host, it's like, and a lot of you, we had to listen to that in secret. So I just remember not discussing, hearing or being a fan of that album for years. It was absolutely, I often talked about Prince, the person, and being groundbreaking as an artist, but you couldn't go deeper than that. I wasn't able to go deeper. It's something you kept to yourself, to be honest.
So the reaction of, say, your friends, I mean, was it an either or thing? Was it like, I like this album, therefore I'm not cool, or
It was it was an outsider. It's just not cool. It's like, we just don't understand it. We don't get it. That's just kind of where it finished. it started and ended there. Really, because it was so unlike anything else anybody else had heard of. And if you think about raunchy music that was out there or sexual music, it was, there was layers to it. People didn't realize how raunchy Barry White was, for instance, and that was for older people. Here was this young guy, and it was so explicit. I mean, you're not going to discuss an album that talks about incest really with somebody, are you? It's not, and also as a northerner, that's the other thing. It's very different in terms of up north, kind of like if you had those conversations, in the main, definitely being black and in the north, it was, in that time and in those times, people were into all dayers and all nighters, and it was definitely a soul thing, or and if you went to blues, which they were called, which were like illegal parties, they were playing reggae. You'd never hear a Prince track wouldn't go on there, not until kind of like much later on. So yeah.
Next question. Sorry, wanted to scroll away from me. For everyone. Okay. Nicolay, I know you can speak to this, but if everybody else can too, feel free to jump in. Do you know what music specifically that Prince was listening to before and during the Dirty Mind recording? Do you have some insight on his influences at that moment? I see Keith nodding, so okay.
Maybe I don't know as much, I think, as Keith knows about that. So I yield to Keith in that in this particular case.
Well, supposedly he was listening to a lot of Clash. He was listening to a lot of Talking Heads.
I've heard Devo too mentioned.
Devo was on his wavelength.
I've read Lisa Coleman talking about Gary Newman.
Well, yeah, these were his four favorite artists. Gary Newman, Talking Heads, The Clash, and I forgot, it was someone else. But the funny part about it is when he would be asked these questions in the interviews early on, and this is Prince forming his inner race man early on before we really see it. He understood that Black artists were supposed to bow at the altar of these rockets, great establishment rock white artists. And he would say, but what do you think about The Clash? He was like, yeah, I dig The Clash, but they really can't sing, but I dig them. He would say stuff like that in interviews about white rock acts. And the only act that he would totally fanboy over, no diss, no sneak diss or anything, was Joni Mitchell. But anybody else was catching strays, like Led Zeppelin catching strays.
Santana, yeah,
Santana, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he was listening to. Gary Newman was big though for him, because that kind of opened up his mind to okay, you mean I can use the synthesizer as a rhythmic part of it too, not just as a filler, but it can be a rhythm machine too. And that's when he started using the synth the way that he started to use it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you can hear, I think, that he's listening to quite a lot of English electronica.
Yeah.
Without question, because it's that very simple rhythm, that very simple, electronic beat, which was very much an English thing.
Yep, a lot of up-tempo stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Ms. Horner, if I could ask, I held up the two magazine covers and I was talking about the 1981 cover about, yes, this is Prince. But the 1979 cover, A Close Encounter with Prince. Oh, okay. Gosh, you got a good memory. Was there any, did the headline match the photo or was there something more of an alien quality about him that you were playing upon?
What are you saying that the reason why we chose that particular cover line?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, back then we tried to match cover lines up with the specific artwork. Nowadays, we would go more for either gossipy type headline or something like that. But back then, it wasn't really necessary to do that. So we would just, I have a very great imagination, just like when I put Michael Jackson and Prince on a cover together. And we had some, turn it into like a music royalty type cover. I actually just like the idea that we had this picture, a certain kind of picture with a certain background, and it just kind of all fell in place because I did have a close encounter with Prince. You know, it was one of those one-on-one conversations that we would always have, and that was that particular cover story.
The idea we were talking about, and for everybody, these are some great questions. And so in the name of trying to get to all of them, I'm going to try to conflate a few that, you know, have similar context to it. When we were talking about the shows, and we talked about the Dirty Mind tour, but also when we were talking about the Purple Rain tour and how Prince was already had Around the World in a Day ready to go, that he could release the album like 2 weeks after or 3 weeks after the tour was over. There were a couple questions relating to, in Dirty Mind zone, was he already thinking forward to controversy or further on? And I know that, and if you join on later for the commentary that Nicolay will be a part of, along with Andre Simone and Vernon Reid and Harold Pride, that he played both Jack You Off, last song on Controversy, and Gotta Stop Messing About, which found its way onto a B-side, the Let's Work B-side. So he was already in, controversy mode, developing that material and working it out, live on stage in front of an audience. And his look also began to evolve and take shape. We were talking about the Rolling Stones opening show at the Los Angeles Coliseum. And if you see pictures of that, and there are some that appear online, and Alan Beaulieu's book has pictures from that concert, you will see it's already controversy mode.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next program is. Do you think, or at least can you, see, to me, there's so many in terms of the influence of Prince. Can you think of, an artist that is almost sort of the standard bearer of trying to have that same kind of forward thinking with, their image, and matching their music? I don't think that anybody can be like, there won't be another Prince in the same way that there won't be another Michael Jackson. I mean, that same kind of, it takes a lifetime to become something like that. And that's not disparaging, that's just facts. But you still can have, artists that try to take that same, model and retrofit it, to their own aesthetic. And if they have the quality to be able to kind of see that what I'm doing now can affect what I'm doing, 3 years from now.
I'm just convinced that that Prince studied Little Richard more than anybody else who was influenced by him. And I've watched interviews before Little Richard passed saying he loved Prince, and also they had that relationship. I mean, right down to the Scream, right down to changing the image, the Little Richard as Princess Fowl, evolving, and playing with sexuality, all of those things. I just think that Prince studied that to a T, and also learned that by looking at Little Richard, this is how you can throw into the future and stay relevant. And if you shout at how great you are, that people will take notice. So for me, I personally feel that Prince followed the Little Richard model. You might not think Little Richard evolved in that same way musically, but that's where I think that Prince stretched that. But I do think he took definitely from Little Richard.
Ms. Horner, was there? I know we talked about the magazines and the media in general, kind of pitting Michael against Prince as there can only be one. But you know, from your perspective, was it a friendly rivalry? And I mean, you have, you know, it's.
I mean, people get very territorial about where they stand in the industry. So I wouldn't call it that friendly. It wasn't that horrible, but
Right.
I would never say that those two could have ever been the best friends.
I think, and I think as the years progressed, it got only, I think, more intense, you know. And I think the media partly also, you know, poured a little oil on that fire, of course, because it's a great narrative. That's why we know about these stories about them playing ping pong and Prince just smashing the ball in Michael's direction at some point, stuff like that. Like, and the infamous story about Michael claiming that that Prince pulled some ESP on him or something, like all these. And I think a lot of that was just tabloid stuff and probably made up. But there's a lot of accounts that the competition was fiercer than just competition.
And you know, the interesting thing is that as they started to hit their downsides of their careers, like the mid 90s when both were kind of like, wow, Mike had to deal with his court stuff. Prince was beefing with Warner Brothers with the slave on his face. They actually became cooler during that period because it was almost like, hey, you know how I feel. Like you're the only person that knows what I've been through. Like nobody else can identify being on the top of the mountain and all of a sudden you're feeling like everybody's coming at you and gunning for you now for, you know, to take you down. There's a story that I did once, oral history of Prince and Michael, where Mike calls up, you know, he tells Prince to give him a call. He's held up at a glitzy hotel somewhere in New York, and Prince calls him up, and their conversation is just it's what you would think it is. It's like, you know, Prince is like, yes, Michael. It's like that type of relationship, and he's like, well, I wanted you to give me a call because, you know, I really want to get in the studio. I really want to do, you know, what we've been talking about. And then Prince goes, are you serious, Michael? Yes, I'm serious. I'm like, and then Prince asking me, are you serious? Like, and that's their relationship. It's almost like Prince is needling him, and Michael is just so open-hearted, and so, you know, and I just think that they grew closer because they felt that they were under attack by a white power system in the music. I mean, this is their thinking. I'm just talking about what they thought. They were being under attack as the two alpha males of this business. And the only people that would know anything how that felt was each other. And, you know, they got closer towards their deaths, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Watching that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, what I would say is what kind of saved everything is back then we didn't have the same kind of, we didn't have the media that we have now. Now everything is more gossipy, more internet driven. Back then we did have music critics that would write what they wanted to write or whatever, but we didn't have what we have now, which probably would have really destroyed things because you've got Twitter and Instagram, and sometimes people might make a comment and they aren't thinking and it's already out there, and then you try to take it back or their account got hacked and it just gets to be a big mess. It didn't get that far because technology was not that advanced at the time. Otherwise, things could have really been a mess because we had bloggers making up stories, you know, to piss against each other even in a worse way, but that didn't exist back then.
Right.
And Keith is right when he spoke of the fact that when both men's careers started fading a little bit, you do then realize what somebody else was going through, because you're going through it too. You know what it's like to be the best artist on your label and people trying to keep your publishing or try to hold back the release date on a new album that you are very passionate about putting out, or whatever. And only those that have been through that can walk in those footsteps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was smiling when you were talking about how different it is now, because then in magazines, you had letters to the editor, and those letters would refer to, depending on the circulation, either a month earlier for the previous issue or 2 weeks earlier, for a bi-monthly. And I remember a Rolling Stone review of the Love Sexy album, and they gave it 3 stars. And I read that, and I was like, hell no. I wrote down, started writing down this letter, and I'm going. Then I got to go find a stamp. Then I had to go find an envelope. Then I had to write the address on the thing. I had to go mail it, and by that time, it's like, I'm not mad anymore after all that.
Yeah.
Well, got that off my chest and just keep it moving.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? We've got a couple more minutes. Any last remarks on the impact of the album, the impact of the album on you, the impact of the album on your music in the case of Nicolay?
It stands out to me as the last, as like an island in Prince's catalog, because it was the last album that he recorded in that way, like at the crib, essentially. By the time he was working on Controversy, he was actually working at Sunset Sound and stuff like that, and got access to better production. That being said, like, the album sounds incredibly fresh to me. You hear stuff in the background, you hear mistakes, you hear little editing cuts, you hear the guitars are plugged in directly to a board. They sound real kind of thin, and yet it really just jumps out at you still. I listened to the entire thing a couple of times yesterday, and man, it is it's a burst. And I guess even because he recorded most of it in a sort of short, concentrated time, and after that started more kind of recording as he went along. Like, Controversy was a much more drawn out process, where it took him about, I think at least half a year to get everything right. And I think Dirty Mind, the most of it, I think, was done maybe in a month or maybe even a week. And I think as such, it is just it is an album that I think a Michael Jackson couldn't really have released under those circumstances, and I think it really just, it really was the start of sort of like Prince's recording career of doing a lot of things by himself, and ultimately, leading, I think, to Paisley Park and just the whole nine. But it's still a sort of like an island, I think, in his overall catalog. A little I called it yesterday, an ugly duckling. You know what I'm saying? It's really, and I mean, but in the best possible way. A lot of grit in that record, same as you see in the photographs around that time. There's some grit there. There's some real gutter type stuff, you know what I'm saying? And that's makes it just incredibly appealing to me still,
Please, Keith.
No, I was about to say, I when you told me about the Dirty Mind thing months ago, and then when you re-upped it and said, hey, it's going to happen, I started thinking about the fact that this black man was making rock music that was whiter than white. And at the same time, he's working on the First Times album. So it tells you where he's making Dirty Mind and he's working on the Times debut. And the Dirty Mind album comes out, doesn't really do that well. Mm-hmm. The First Time album comes out, goes gold.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you everything that you need to know about Prince, that he used the time to supplement his career and to keep his black base. Like, listen, I'm black. I'm still black. You know, this is what I do. For people that know that I'm really producing this, because of course he didn't tell anybody he was producing it. It was all a big secret early on. But to me, Dirty Mind says it just speaks to freedom. It speaks to doing whatever you want to do, whatever people would say, whatever they call you. The whole uptown mystique is real. That's a real thing. Mm-hmm. People really brought into that. Like, yeah, if I can walk outside and look like whatever I want to look like, and I'm going to be cool. So that's what that album means to me. It's just being yourself, and just whatever comes what may, damn all of the mainstream, do what you need to do.
And can I just come off the back of that to say that I totally agree with that, because when you look at Dirty Mind, that was 1980, and which black artists want to go that far today? And I always say that, you know, in terms of which black artists would dare to not only be that free stylistically on record and with their visuals, and there isn't anybody that is prepared to go that far, particularly a black male. And in the UK, it just would be blocked. And it would, you know, so we can say we've moved on, but have we? If somebody came and did that even as a replica today, I guarantee a record company would be, or a record company would be saying no, but black artists working independently, there'd be people in their camp saying, don't do it. And that just shows you how ahead of his time Prince was.
Yeah. Thank you so very much. Keith Murray.
Appreciate it.
It's on Twitter at Murphdog, MURPHDOGG29. Karen Gabay is at KAZGABAY. Nicolay is at Nicolay Music, NICOLAYMUSIC. And you're going to be Miss Horner just once.
The queen.
Just once. I'm going to publicly,
The queen.
Right on Digital One, all on Twitter. Thank you so very much. My name is Arthur. I'm on Twitter, RRTHUWR. I made it. We made it.
We did it.
Thank you so much for hanging with us.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you. Arthur.